The snowman watched us. We shouldn't have built that snowman. That's the first thought that haunts me as I sit in this cold, silent cabin, staring at the footprints leading from the door to the woods. One set of footprints, not two. Anna is gone, and I'm alone. It started as a perfect Valentine's getaway, a remote cabin deep in the snow-covered mountains, just the two of us, away from the noise of the city. The kind of place where the air is too quiet, the trees too still, and the wind carries whispers you can almost but not quite hear. We arrived in the afternoon, excited to spend the weekend together. The snow was fresh, untouched except for our footprints leading to the cabin. The first night was warm, filled with laughter, wine, and the comfort of a crackling fire. Outside, the snow fell softly, covering the ground like a thick white blanket. The next morning, Anna woke up before me, nudging me with cold fingers. "Let's build a snowman," she whispered, her breath warm against my neck. I groaned but followed her outside, shivering as the wind bit through my jacket. The sky was a dull gray, the kind that makes it hard to tell what time it is. We worked in silence, stacking the heavy snow, shaping it into a lumpy but familiar form. I found a few small stones to make its eyes, a crooked branch for its mouth, and Anna stuck a long, twisted twig into its face for a nose. The snowman was ugly, uneven, and unsettling. "Looks creepy," I muttered, brushing the frost off my gloves. Anna grinned. "Good. He can watch over us." That's when the feeling started. A creeping, crawling sensation at the back of my neck, like we were being watched. The wind picked up, and for a second, I swore I heard something in it, something that almost sounded like a chuckle. I turned sharply, scanning the tree line, but there was nothing, just the vast empty whiteness. That night, as we sat by the fire, I glanced out the window. The snowman stood exactly where we left it. But something was different. The eyes. I could have sworn they were looking directly at the window now. When we built it, its gaze was slightly off to the side, but now it was staring straight at us. I swallowed the unease creeping up my spine. "Hey, Anna," I said, trying to sound casual. "Did you move the snowman?" She looked up from her book, frowning. "What number?" I forced a chuckle. "Must be my imagination." Anna rolled her eyes and went back to reading, but I kept staring. The fire flickered against the glass, making shadows dance across the snow, but the snowman's black stone eyes remained fixed on the cabin, watching. I barely slept that night. I woke up to a sound outside, a soft, scraping noise like something heavy being dragged through the snow. I lay still, listening, heart pounding. The wind howled against the windows, but beneath it I swore I heard something else. A shuffling, a slow, deliberate movement. I reached over, shaking Anna awake. "Do you hear that?" I whispered. She groaned, turning over. "It's just the wind. Go back to sleep." But I couldn't. Not when I was sure, absolutely sure, the sound was coming from right outside our window. The next morning, I hesitated before looking outside. When I finally did, my breath caught in my throat. The snowman was closer. It had been at least 10 feet from the cabin yesterday. Now it was half that distance. The worst part, there were no footprints leading to it, no sign that anyone had moved it. I felt sick. "Anna," I called, my voice shaky. She joined me by the window, her expression shifting from sleepy confusion to unease. "That's weird," she admitted. "Maybe it's the wind." "The wind doesn't move solid snowmen," I said through clenched teeth. Anna laughed nervously. "Okay, well, maybe it just looks closer. Snow shifts, right?" But she didn't sound convinced. By sunset, the feeling of being watched had become unbearable. Every time I looked outside, the snowman seemed different. The stones forming its eyes were deeper in the snow, making them look sunken. Its mouth, once a simple curved branch, now seemed stretched into something unnatural, a wide, open grin. I tried to shake it off. I tried to ignore the way my stomach twisted when I passed by the window, but then, around midnight, I woke up to Anna screaming. I bolted upright, my heart in my throat. "What? What happened?" She was shaking, pointing at the window. "It moved," she choked out. "It's right outside." I turned, and my stomach dropped. The snowman was at the window, right up against the glass, its black eyes level with ours, that horrible, twisted grin stretching wide. I scrambled out of bed, grabbing my jacket. "We're leaving." Anna didn't argue. We threw on our clothes, grabbed our bags, and bolted for the door. My hands fumbled with the lock, the metal ice-cold beneath my fingers. When I finally yanked it open, my breath caught in my chest. Footprints, leading from the snowman. Only one set. Deep, deliberate imprints in the snow, walking from the figure to our cabin. And then, nothing. No return prints. No sign of where whoever, or whatever, had moved it had gone. Anna gasped, "No, no, no." I grabbed her wrist and pulled her toward the car, fumbling for the keys. The engine roared to life, and I slammed the gas, spraying snow behind us as we tore down the narrow, icy road. I didn't look back. I couldn't. But as we drove, the radio crackled to life. At first it was static. Then, buried beneath the white noise, I heard something else, a laugh. Low, wheezing, almost human, but not quite. Anna turned the radio off, her hands shaking. She swallowed. "I don't think we should ever come back here." I nodded, gripping the wheel tighter. The road stretched endlessly before us, the snowy darkness swallowing everything behind. The cabin, the snowman, and whatever had been watching us from the start. Story number 2. The roses were rotten. The first thing I noticed was the smell. It wasn't the soft floral scent of roses. It was something rotten, something foul, like decay hidden beneath sweetness. I wrinkled my nose, staring at the bouquet in my hands. The petals were a deep velvety red, perfect in shape, yet something about them felt wrong. I had bought the roses earlier that evening, just before the snow started falling heavily. The florist had given me a strange look when I asked for the best bouquet they had. "Valentine special," I had joked, trying to lighten the mood. She hesitated before picking up the roses, almost like she didn't want to touch them. Now, standing in my apartment, I couldn't shake the unease twisting in my gut. The flowers looked fresh, yet the air around them carried the unmistakable stench of something long dead. I should have thrown them away then. Instead, I placed them in a vase on the dining table, pushing the unsettling feeling aside. Maybe it was my imagination. Maybe the cold air had mixed with the scent, distorting it. Anna arrived an hour later, shaking snow from her coat. "You got me flowers?" she asked, surprised. "Of course," I said, forcing a smile. "It's Valentine's Day." She leaned in to smell them, and immediately recoiled. "What the hell?" She covered her nose, stepping back. "Did you get these from a dumpster?" I laughed uneasily. "No, I swear, I got them from the shop near the station." She frowned, staring at them. "They smell like something's rotting." I reached for the bouquet, running my fingers along the petals. They felt normal, soft, delicate. But as I lifted them, a single petal fell off. Beneath it, the stem was blackened, shriveled. The decay had started from the inside. Anna shook her head. "That's disgusting. Just throw them out." I nodded, grabbing the vase. But as I walked toward the trash, something stopped me. A whisper. It was faint, almost too soft to hear, but I felt it crawl up my spine. "Keep them." I froze. The voice wasn't Anna's. It wasn't mine. It was something else, something that slithered between the cracks of the walls, hiding in the shadows of the room. I turned sharply. "Did you say something?" Anna looked up from her phone. "Huh?" I forced a chuckle. "Never mind. I should have thrown them away." That night I woke up gasping, the air thick with the scent of rot. I sat up, my breath clouding in the freezing room. The heater was on, but the temperature had dropped, a sharp chill sinking into my bones, and then I heard it. A soft rustling sound. I turned toward the window. The roses sat on the nightstand. I swear they hadn't been there before. I had left them in the living room, hadn't I? The petals were blackened now, curling inward like something withering in pain. The stems twisted unnaturally, as if they were trying to reach for something. I swallowed hard, my pulse hammering. I grabbed the vase, heart pounding. and rushed to the bathroom, dumping the entire bouquet into the trash. The moment the flowers hit the bin, the whisper returned. This time, it was louder. "Why did you do that?" My breath hitched. The voice was right behind me. I spun around. No one. The bathroom mirror reflected my pale face, the shadows behind me stretching, shifting. The air reeked of decay, stronger now, wrapping around me like invisible fingers. I shut the bin lid, forcing my hands to stay steady. "It's just my mind playing tricks on me," I muttered under my breath. I barely slept after that. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt something watching, something waiting. By morning, the smell was gone. The air felt lighter, and for a moment I convinced myself it had all been in my head, until I stepped into the kitchen. The roses were back, sitting perfectly in the vase on the dining table. Fresh, vibrant, like I had never thrown them away. I stumbled back, my chest tightening. My eyes darted to the trash can in the bathroom. I lifted the lid. Empty. No roses. No sign that I had ever thrown them away. A deep, suffocating dread settled in my gut. Hannah walked in, yawning. "Morning." She stopped mid-sentence, staring at the table. "You put them back?" she asked slowly. I shook my head. I threw them away last night." Her face paled. "Then how are they still here?" I didn't have an answer. By noon the flowers began changing again. The petals darkened, curling inward, the scent of rot creeping back into the apartment. The air felt heavier, like something unseen was pressing down on us. Then came the knocks. Soft at first, a gentle tap-tap-tap against the front door. I hesitated before moving closer, my heartbeat hammering in my ears. Through the peephole, the hallway was empty. Another knock. This time from behind me. I spun around. The sound had come from the window. Outside, the snow was falling in thick, silent waves, and in the reflection of the glass just behind me, a shadow. Tall, twisted, its head cocked at an unnatural angle. I turned fast. But there was nothing there, just the flowers, the blackened, decayed roses sitting quietly in the vase. Anna grabbed her coat. "We need to leave," she whispered. I nodded. But as we reached the door, it wouldn't budge. The lock twisted, the handle refusing to turn. It was as if something was holding it shut. The lights flickered. The air turned suffocatingly cold. And then, the whisper. "Stay!" Anna screamed as the roses exploded into blackened petals, scattering across the floor like dead insects. The walls creaked, the windows rattled, and that horrible, rotting stench filled the room. I didn't think. I grabbed the vase and hurled it against the wall. Glass shattered, the remaining stems falling limp. The moment they hit the ground, the room fell silent. The door unlocked. We didn't look back. We ran, bolting into the freezing winter night, snow crunching beneath our feet as we fled. By the time we reached the street, the apartment lights flickered one last time, then went dark. We never went back. A week later, I got a call from the florist. Her voice was hesitant, almost afraid. "Sir, about the roses you bought. I don't know how to say this, but we never sold you those." My stomach dropped. "What?" She cleared her throat, sounding uneasy. "The bouquet you described, it's identical to one a woman bought a year ago. She was supposed to meet her fiancé for Valentine's dinner, but she never made it. They found her. Murdered. The only thing left untouched in her apartment were the roses, and ever since then, they keep showing up, looking for someone else." I hung up without another word, but every year, on Valentine's Day, I still smell it. The roses, the scent of something dead, something waiting. Story number 3. Our reflection didn't match. I should have noticed it earlier. The way her reflection moved a little too slowly. The way her lips curled into a smile a fraction of a second later than they should have. The way, even in the soft glow of the restaurant candlelight, something in the glass seemed off. But I didn't notice. Not at first. It was Valentine's night. and the world outside was swallowed in thick snow. The roads were empty, the wind howling like a distant voice in the dark. Inside the restaurant, the warmth of the dim lights and the soft murmur of conversation created a false sense of comfort. Anna sat across from me, her fingers tracing lazy circles on the rim of her wine glass. She looked beautiful, exactly as she always did. But something was wrong. It started subtly. A shift in the air, a strange tension that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. I wasn't sure why, but the longer I looked at her, the more uneasy I felt. Her eyes seemed darker, deeper, like they were pulling me in. Then I saw it. Over her shoulder, just behind her, was a massive mirror spanning the restaurant wall. It reflected everything: the candlelit tables, the golden glow of the chandelier, the waiters moving between guests, and us. Or at least, what should have been us. But our reflection didn't match. I blinked, my stomach twisting. Anna was lifting her wine glass, bringing it to her lips, but in the mirror, her reflection wasn't drinking. It was staring at me. I froze. For a second I thought I imagined it. But as she set her glass down, I saw it again. The real Anna smiled at me, tilting her head slightly, but in the mirror her reflection was just a little slower, delayed. The movement just a little too stiff, too unnatural. I tried to steady my breathing, forcing a chuckle. "You okay?" I asked, my voice sounding thinner than I intended. She frowned. "Of course. Why?" I didn't answer. My fingers clenched around my fork. I forced myself to look at my own reflection. It was normal, perfectly in sync. But hers wasn't right. Maybe it was a trick of the light, maybe the candle flames were playing with my perception. But deep in my gut, something screamed at me that this wasn't normal. I swallowed hard. "I think I need some air." She nodded, going back to her food as if she hadn't noticed anything. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping against the polished floor, and made my way toward the restroom. As I passed the mirror, I stole a glance. Anna's reflection wasn't watching me anymore. It was smiling, but not at me, at itself. My heart pounded as I stumbled into the restroom, locking the door behind me. I gripped the sink, forcing deep breaths. This was ridiculous. I was being paranoid. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe... A soft knock on the door. I jolted, nearly slipping on the tile. "Babe?" Anna's voice was light, but something about it made my skin crawl. "You okay in there?" I hesitated. "Yeah, just give me a sec." Silence. Then, "You're acting weird." I clenched my jaw. My reflection in the bathroom mirror stared back at me, wide-eyed, breath uneven. I turned on the faucet, splashing cold water onto my face. Another knock. This time, softer. "I'll be right out," I called. No answer. I dried my hands, glancing back at the mirror one last time before unlocking the door. The hallway was empty. The restaurant was quiet, but the air felt heavier now. More aware. I made my way back to the table, my footsteps slow, deliberate. Anna was waiting, her hands folded neatly on the table. She smiled as I sat down. "You okay now?" I nodded stiffly. She picked up her fork, twirling her pasta. I forced myself to eat, but my eyes kept drifting to the mirror behind her. The reflection was normal again, perfectly in sync. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe. Then she spoke. "Do you love me?" I looked up. Her voice was soft, careful, but something about the way she said it made my stomach tighten. "Of course," I said. "Why would you ask that?" She tilted her head. "Because you keep looking at the mirror." My pulse spiked. Her smile widened, and then in the mirror her reflection blinked, twice. The real Anna hadn't blinked at all. I pushed back from the table so fast that the chair nearly tipped over. My breath came in short gasps as I stared at her. No, at it. The thing wearing Anna's face. Her expression didn't change. The room felt smaller, the candlelight dimmer. The other diners blurred into the background. Then, slowly, she reached across the table. Her fingers curled over my wrist, cold as ice. Story number 4. The Last Reservation. The restaurant wasn't supposed to exist. I searched for hours, calling every decent place in the city, but every Valentine's reservation was fully booked. Then, just as I was about to give up, I found it. La Morte Rouge. The website was simple, almost too plain, with a single line at the bottom, a dining experience like no other. Open only on February 14th. It had no reviews, no listed address, only a phone number. When I called, a soft-spoken man answered. "You are in luck," he said. "A table for 2 is available. Our final reservation of the night." Something about his voice made my skin prickle, but I brushed it off. I wanted the night to be perfect. The directions led us outside the city, past frozen roads and snow-covered trees. Anna was hesitant. "Are you sure this is the right way?" she asked, glancing at the darkened road ahead. The headlights barely cut through the thick snowfall. I triple-checked, I assured her. It should be just up ahead. And then we saw it. The restaurant stood alone in a clearing, its windows glowing a warm, golden hue against the cold. It was grand, too grand for a place no one had heard of. Tall, Victorian-style architecture with intricate carvings along the wooden beams. The sign above the entrance read, La Morte Rouge, in elegant cursive, but the paint was old, slightly chipped. The moment we stepped inside, the warmth wrapped around us like a heavy embrace. The scent of roasted meat, aged wine, and something sweet yet unfamiliar filled the air. The hostess at the podium smiled too widely, her skin porcelain pale. "Welcome," she murmured, her voice silky. "We've been expecting you." I hesitated. The dining room was lavish. Deep red walls, dim candlelight, and guests dressed in vintage attire. The air hummed with soft, echoing whispers, though no one was speaking loudly. The moment we sat down, a waiter appeared, tall, expressionless, with eyes too dark to reflect the light. "The chef has already prepared something special for you," he said, setting down 2 plates. I frowned. "But we haven't even ordered." Anna squeezed my hand. "Maybe it's one of those fancy places with preset menus." She lifted her fork, ready to take a bite, but I grabbed her wrist. The meat on the plate was rare, too rare. The juices pooling around it were darker than they should have been, with a metallic scent beneath the seasonings. A deep velvety voice cut through the air. "A meal is best enjoyed fresh." I turned. At the far end of the room sat an older man in an elaborate crimson suit. His presence was suffocating, as if the entire room bent around him. His eyes, black, endless, held mine as he smiled, revealing teeth just a bit too sharp. "Eat," he said. Anna looked at me, confused. "What's wrong?" she whispered. Everything in me screamed to leave, but when I looked around, the guests were watching. Their faces still, expectant. Some were smiling, some weren't, but every single one of them was looking at us. The waiter leaned closer. His breath was cold against my ear. It would be unwise to refuse. I swallowed, gripping my fork. Anna, oblivious to the tension, took a bite. I watched, heart hammering, as she chewed slowly. Then she froze. Her eyes widened. She dropped her fork. Her hands trembled. I grabbed her arm. "What is it?" She didn't answer. She was staring at the plate, the color draining from her face. I followed her gaze, and my stomach twisted. The meat was no longer cooked. It was raw, pulsing, like it was still alive. My breath hitched. I pushed my chair back, grabbing Anna's hand. "We're leaving." The room fell silent. The whispers stopped. The man in the crimson suit exhaled slowly, disappointment darkening his face. "That is unfortunate." The guests began to rise, their movements unnervingly slow. The candlelight flickered, shadows stretching unnaturally across the floor. The waiter, still standing beside me, smiled for the first time. His lips peeled back too far, exposing rows of uneven teeth. Anna clutched my arm. "We need to go," she whispered, barely audible. I didn't wait. I grabbed her wrist and bolted toward the door. But the entrance was gone. The grand wooden doors we had walked through were no longer there. In their place was only a wall, deep red like the rest of the room, as if the exit had never existed. My chest tightened. Number no, no, no. The guests were stepping closer. Their faces were shifting, their skin darkening, stretching, becoming something inhuman. Their whispers returned, louder now, crawling into my skull. Anna was shaking, gripping my arm so tightly it hurt. "What do we do?" The man in the crimson suit stood. His presence filled the entire room, pressing against us like an unbearable weight. "You made a reservation," he murmured, his voice dripping with amusement, "and we do not waste food." A sickening realization hit me. We weren't here to eat. We were the meal. Anna screamed as the walls pulsed like a living thing, the candle flames flickering wildly. The guests' mouths unhinged, their teeth jagged, faces warping into something monstrous. I didn't think. I just ran. Dragging Anna with me, I lunged toward the kitchen doors. The moment we burst through, the warmth disappeared. The air was freezing, the floor slick with something wet. It wasn't a kitchen, it was a slaughterhouse. Hooks lined the ceiling, dripping with fresh crimson. The smell of raw flesh was suffocating. And in the center of the room, bodies hung like meat. Some were still twitching. Anna gagged, stumbling back. "This isn't real. This can't be real." A guttural voice echoed behind us. "You shouldn't have come." We spun around. A figure stood in the doorway, taller than any human should be. Its face was stretched, grinning, its eyes hollow pits. It took a step forward. I grabbed a knife from the counter, the handle slick with something warm. My heart pounded. The walls groaned, the air thickened, the thing lunged. I swung wildly, the blade sinking into flesh. A shriek tore through the air. Anna yanked me toward another door, and we stumbled through, falling. And then suddenly we were outside. The restaurant was gone. We lay in the snow, panting, the cold burning our skin. The road stretched before us, empty, silent, no building, no lights, just the endless dark woods behind us. Anna clutched my arm. "It was real," she whispered, voice shaking. "It was all real." I couldn't speak. My fingers were still wrapped around the knife handle, but it was clean. No blood, no proof of what had happened. A breeze stirred the snow, and for a moment I swore I heard it, soft, distant whispers. The kind that wait, the kind that know, because La Morte Rouge only opens one night a year, and its last reservation is never meant to leave. Story number 5. The Voice in the Blizzard. The first time I heard the voice, I thought it was the wind. The blizzard had swallowed everything, the road, the sky, even the headlights of my car. Anna sat beside me, fingers digging into her coat, her breath fogging up the windshield. The snow was coming down so fast that the wipers struggled to keep up, and the GPS had given up miles ago. I clenched the wheel, my knuckles white. We should have stayed at the motel. Anna exhaled sharply. We were 15 minutes away. How were we supposed to know the storm would hit this hard? She was right, but it didn't make me feel any better. The cabin rental had promised a romantic, secluded getaway, a perfect Valentine's retreat. Now we were lost in a snowstorm with no cell signal, no road signs, and barely any visibility. The trees lining the road were just vague shadows, barely distinguishable from the night itself. And then I heard it. A voice, faint, buried in the howling wind. "Help me." I stiffened. My eyes darted to Anna, but she was staring at the road, oblivious. There it was again. "Please, help me." I swallowed, tightening my grip on the wheel. The voice was close, too close. It wasn't coming from outside. It was inside the car. A shiver crawled up my spine. "Did you hear that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Anna frowned. "Hear what?" The voice whispered again, right in my ear. "Stop the car." I slammed the brakes. The tires skidded on the ice, the car fishtailing before coming to a jerking halt. Anna yelped, gripping the dashboard. "What the hell, Mark?" My chest rose and fell rapidly. I thought I heard someone." Anna scanned the road. Nothing but white. No signs of movement. No footprints in the thick snow. Just the endless void of the storm. "There's no one out there," she said, her voice uneasy. But I wasn't looking outside. I was looking in the rearview mirror. A shape sat in the back seat. My throat closed. For a second I couldn't breathe. It was faint, barely there, but unmistakable. A shadowy outline, no features, no eyes, just a presence. I turned sharply, heart hammering. The back seat was empty. A gust of wind rocked the car, and Anna shivered. "Mark, we need to keep moving. We can't stay here." I nodded stiffly, forcing my hands back onto the wheel. The tires crunched forward, the road disappearing beneath us again. But my eyes kept flicking to the mirror. The shadow was gone, but something told me it hadn't left. The voice returned minutes later. This time Anna heard it too. "Turn left." She jerked upright. "Did you hear that?" I nodded, my stomach twisting. "I heard it earlier. I thought I was imagining things." The voice whispered again, soft, insistent. "Turn left." "There's no left," I muttered. "It's just trees." And yet, there it was. A narrow opening between the trees, barely wide enough for the car. It hadn't been there moments ago. Anna grabbed my arm. "Don't. That wasn't there before." The temperature inside the car plummeted. The windshield fogged up instantly, ice creeping along the edges of the glass. The voice was no longer a whisper. It was right behind me. "Turn left, Mark." I slammed the gas pedal. The car lurched forward past the opening, back onto the barely visible road. The moment we passed it, the storm seemed to intensify, the wind shrieking like something furious. Anna was shaking. What the hell was that? I didn't answer. I couldn't. My hands were trembling, my pulse roared in my ears, and then the engine sputtered. The dashboard lights flickered. The car slowed. "No, no, no," I muttered, pressing the gas. Nothing. The headlights dimmed. The radio crackled, and the voice whispered, "You should have turned." Anna screamed. The headlights died completely. Darkness swallowed us whole. I fumbled for my phone, but the screen was black, unresponsive. The air inside the car felt thick, heavy, suffocating. Something scraped against the roof. Slow. Deliberate. Anna clutched my arm, her breath ragged. "Mark." The scratching grew louder, moving toward the driver's side window. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. Then silence. For a moment, nothing but our breathing filled the air. I didn't dare move. Then a single tap on the glass. My body locked up. My fingers dug into my thighs. Tap. Tap. Anna squeezed her eyes shut. "Don't look." The voice was inches from my ear. "Look at me." Every nerve in my body screamed no, but I did. The window was frosted over, but behind the ice, a face pressed against the glass. No eyes, no mouth. Just a hollow, twisted thing, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. It grinned. The car shook violently. Anna sobbed, gripping me so tight it felt like she'd break my arm. The thing outside whispered, "You should have turned." The back door handle rattled. I moved without thinking. I reached for the key, twisting it desperately. The engine coughed, sputtered, and roared to life. The headlights flared, cutting through the darkness. The windshield cleared in an instant. The blizzard was gone. The thing at the window was gone. I didn't question it. I hit the gas, the tires spinning before catching traction. The car surged forward. Neither of us spoke. Not when we found the cabin. Not when we bolted inside, locking every door. It wasn't until hours later, when the fire was roaring and the storm had passed, that Anna finally whispered, "It wanted us to turn." I stared into the flames, my hands still trembling. "I think it was leading us somewhere," she continued, "but why?" I didn't answer because I didn't want to tell her the truth. I'd seen something in the mirror before the headlights came back on. A road, the left turn. It didn't lead into the woods. It led straight down, into nothing. If we had turned, we would have driven off a cliff. Something had tried to kill us. But something else, something just as terrifying, had saved us. And I didn't know which one would come back first. Story number 6. The Candlelit Cabin. The cabin was already warm when we arrived. That was the first sign that something was wrong. Anna and I had been driving for hours through the endless snow, the road winding deeper into the frozen forest. The cabin rental had promised a secluded getaway. No neighbors, no distractions, just us and the silence of the mountains. But as we pulled up, headlights illuminating the wooden structure, something felt off. Through the window, a golden glow flickered. The fireplace is already lit? Anna frowned, pulling her coat tighter around her. Did the owner say anything about prepping the place before we arrived? I shook my head, gripping the steering wheel a little tighter. Number, they just said the key would be under the mat. We stepped out, our boots crunching against the snow. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of burning wood, but there was something else beneath it, something sweeter, like flowers long past their prime. I lifted the welcome mat, finding the key exactly where it was supposed to be, but when I unlocked the door and pushed it open, the heat that rushed out was almost suffocating. Inside, the cabin was perfect, too perfect. The fire crackled warmly in the stone hearth. A bottle of wine sat open on the table, and 2 glasses were already poured. Candlelight danced across the wooden walls, casting shifting shadows. Anna hesitated in the doorway. "Are you sure no one's here?" I stepped inside, scanning the room. Everything looked untouched, pristine, but there was something deeply unsettling about walking into a space that should have been cold and dark, yet was waiting for us like an unfinished story. I forced a chuckle. Maybe it's just good hospitality. Anna didn't laugh. We locked the door behind us, trying to shake the unease. The cabin was small, just a single open space with a bedroom loft overhead. Cozy, quaint. But as we settled in, the feeling of being watched never left. It started with small things. The way the flames in the fireplace flickered, even when there was no draft. The way the wine bottle never seemed to empty, no matter how much we drank. The way the candles never burned down. Then, the whispering started. I heard it first. A faint murmur, just on the edge of hearing, like someone speaking behind a closed door. I turned sharply, scanning the room, but Anna was curled up on the couch, scrolling through her phone. "You hear that?" I asked. She looked up. "What?" I hesitated. Maybe it was the wind. Maybe the storm outside was making the trees creak. "Nothing," I muttered, rubbing the back of my neck. But it wasn't nothing. That night, as we lay in bed, the whispering returned. I wasn't asleep. I had been staring at the ceiling, watching the candlelight flicker across the wooden beams. The murmur was soft, almost melodic, like a conversation just beyond my reach. Then I felt it. A breath, cold, right against my ear. I bolted upright, my pulse hammering. The room was still, the fire still crackled, the shadows still danced, but something had changed. The air was different, thicker, heavier, like the cabin itself was holding its breath. Anna stirred beside me. "What is it?" I swallowed hard. "Nothing, just thought I heard something." She yawned, rolling over. "Probably the wind." I nodded, forcing myself to lie back down. But as I closed my eyes, I felt it again. The sensation of someone standing right next to the bed, watching. By morning, the atmosphere in the cabin had shifted. The air felt stale, the warmth of the fire no longer comforting, but oppressive. The candles were still burning, even though neither of us had relit them. The wine bottle was still full, untouched, even though I remembered pouring another glass the night before. Then Anna found the note. She had been rummaging through the kitchen drawers when she pulled out a small folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. She frowned, turning it over in her hands. "There's writing on it," she murmured. I leaned in as she unfolded it. The words were scrawled in shaky handwriting, barely legible. "If you find this, you're not alone. Do not stay past midnight. Do not let the candles go out. Do not look at her." My blood ran cold. "What the hell?" I started, but Anna dropped the paper, her face draining of color. "The mirror," she whispered. I turned. The cabin only had one mirror, an old, dusty thing hanging by the bathroom door. It had been fogged over when we arrived, the glass streaked with age. But now there was something in it. A shape. A woman, standing just behind us. I spun around, heart pounding. The room was empty, but in the reflection, she was still there, tall, hollow-eyed, her mouth stretched too wide, her head tilting unnaturally, and she was watching us. The whispering grew louder. Anna gasped, stumbling back. "We need to go, now." I didn't argue. We grabbed our coats, moving toward the door, and the fire went out. Instantly the warmth vanished. The air turned ice-cold, the candles flickered violently, and the whispering rose to a deafening hum, voices overlapping, pressing against my skull. The cabin door wouldn't open. I yanked the handle, panic setting in. The walls seemed closer now, the shadows stretching toward us. Behind us the mirror cracked. Anna screamed. The reflection of the woman was gone. And then a whisper, right in my ear. "You stayed too long." The candles went out. Darkness swallowed us whole. I don't remember how we got out. One moment, we were trapped. The next, we were outside, stumbling through the snow, the cabin a dark silhouette behind us. The headlights of our car flickered on as if welcoming us back. Without looking back, we threw ourselves inside and sped down the icy road. The cabin disappeared into the night. We never found it again. The listing vanished. The number was disconnected. The GPS coordinates led to an empty clearing, no signs of any structure ever being there. But sometimes, on cold winter nights, I swear I can still smell the candles, still hear the whispering, still feel the presence behind me waiting for us to come back. Story number 7. She wasn't my girlfriend. I woke up to the sound of soft breathing beside me. The room was dim, the early morning light barely creeping through the frost-covered window. The air smelled of lavender and the faint trace of last night's wine. My arm was draped over Anna's waist, the warmth of her body pressed against mine. It should have been a perfect moment, except something felt wrong. I blinked, trying to shake the grogginess. My head throbbed slightly, remnants of the Valentine's dinner and too much red wine lingering. But there was something else. A tightness in my chest, a gnawing unease at the edges of my consciousness. I turned my head slightly, peering at the woman lying next to me. Anna's hair spilled over the pillow, dark and silky, just as it always did. Her skin was pale in the morning light, her breathing slow and steady. And yet, something wasn't right. I didn't know what at first. It was subtle, like when you walk into a room and feel that something has been moved, but you can't figure out what. A tiny shift in the details. A wrongness so small it shouldn't matter, but it does. Then she stirred. Her body shifted under the blankets, and as she turned toward me, her eyes fluttered open. My stomach dropped. They weren't Anna's eyes. The color was the same, a deep, rich brown, but the shape was off. Too wide, too alert. Anna always woke up slowly, blinking away sleep, her expression soft and unfocused. But this woman, this thing, was already watching me. "Morning," she murmured, her voice smooth and familiar. I swallowed hard. "Morning." She smiled, reaching out to brush a hand over my cheek. Her fingers were warm, gentle, but my skin crawled beneath her touch. I forced myself to stay calm. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe my brain was still sluggish from sleep. But as I stared at her, the wrongness sharpened. The tiny scar above her left eyebrow, it was missing. The scar she got from falling off her bike when she was 12. I felt a cold sweat break across my skin. "Did you sleep well?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. I nodded stiffly. Her lips curled into a smile. It was Anna's smile, almost, but there was something about the way her mouth moved, just a fraction too slow. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. I needed to stay calm, I needed to think. I sat up slowly, forcing a yawn. "Yeah, I just need some water." She watched me as I swung my legs over the edge of the bed, her gaze following my every movement. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand, my hands clammy as I tapped the screen. The date flashed at the top. February 15th, the day after Valentine's. I scrolled through my messages, searching for something, anything, that would prove I wasn't losing my mind. And then I found it,
A text from Anna. "Hey babe, my flight got delayed. I won't be home until this afternoon. I miss you." My stomach turned to ice. My fingers tightened around the phone. I read the message again, my vision blurring with panic. Anna wasn't here. She had been visiting her sister. She hadn't come home last night. The woman in my bed wasn't my girlfriend. My breath hitched. My pulse roared in my ears. She was still watching me. I forced a smile, slipping my phone into my pocket. "I'll be right back," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I stood up, moving carefully toward the door. My legs felt stiff, my body screaming at me to run, but I didn't, not yet. She tilted her head, her smile never faltering. "Hurry back." I stepped into the hallway, closing the door behind me. The moment I was out of sight, I bolted. I ran to the bathroom, locking the door behind me. My hands shook as I fumbled with my phone, my fingers clumsy with terror. I dialed Anna's number. It rang once, twice, then... "Hey, babe." Her voice was light, normal, the real Anna. "I just landed. Can't wait to see you."
Story number 7. She wasn't my girlfriend. I woke up to the sound of soft breathing beside me. The room was dim, the early morning light barely creeping through the frost-covered window. The air smelled of lavender and the faint trace of last night's wine. My arm was draped over Anna's waist, the warmth of her body pressed against mine. It should have been a perfect moment, except something felt wrong. I blinked, trying to shake the grogginess. My head throbbed slightly, remnants of the Valentine's dinner and too much red wine lingering. But there was something else, a tightness in my chest, a gnawing unease at the edges of my consciousness. I turned my head slightly, peering at the woman lying next to me. Anna's hair spilled over the pillow, dark and silky, just as it always did. Her skin was pale in the morning light, her breathing slow and steady, and yet something wasn't right. I didn't know what at first. It was subtle, like when you walk into a room and feel that something has been moved, but you can't figure out what. A tiny shift in the details. A wrongness so small it shouldn't matter, but it does. Then she stirred. Her body shifted under the blankets, and as she turned toward me, her eyes fluttered open. My stomach dropped. They weren't Anna's eyes. The color was the same, a deep, rich brown, but the shape was off. Too wide, too alert. Anna always woke up slowly, blinking away sleep, her expression soft and unfocused. But this woman, this thing, was already watching me. "Morning," she murmured, her voice smooth and familiar. I swallowed hard. "Morning." She smiled, reaching out to brush a hand over my cheek. Her fingers were warm, gentle, but my skin crawled beneath her touch. I forced myself to stay calm. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe my brain was still sluggish from sleep. But as I stared at her, the wrongness sharpened. The tiny scar above her left eyebrow, it was missing. The scar she got from falling off her bike when she was 12. I felt a cold sweat break across my skin. "Did you sleep well?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. I nodded stiffly. Her lips curled into a smile. It was Anna's smile. Almost. But there was something about the way her mouth moved, just a fraction too slow. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. I needed to stay calm. I needed to think. I sat up slowly, forcing a yawn. "Yeah, I just need some water." She watched me as I swung my legs over the edge of the bed, her gaze following my every movement. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand, my hands clammy as I tapped the screen. The date flashed at the top, February 15th, the day after Valentine's. I scrolled through my messages, searching for something, anything, that would prove I wasn't losing my mind. And then I found it. A text from Anna. "Hey babe, my flight got delayed. I won't be home until this afternoon. I miss you." My stomach turned to ice. My fingers tightened around the phone. I read the message again, my vision blurring with panic. Anna wasn't here. She had been visiting her sister. She hadn't come home last night. The woman in my bed wasn't my girlfriend. My breath hitched. My pulse roared in my ears. She was still watching me. I forced a smile, slipping my phone into my pocket. "I'll be right back," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I stood up, moving carefully toward the door. My legs felt stiff, my body screaming at me to run. But I didn't. Not yet. She tilted her head, her smile never faltering. "Hurry back." I stepped into the hallway, closing the door behind me. The moment I was out of sight, I bolted. I ran to the bathroom, locking the door behind me. My hands shook as I fumbled with my phone, my fingers clumsy with terror. I dialed Anna's number. It rang once, twice. Then, "Hey, babe." Her voice was light, normal. The real Anna. "I just landed. Can't wait to see you." My throat tightened. My voice came out hoarse. "Anna." She paused. "You okay? You sound weird." I gripped the sink, my knuckles turning white. "Where are you?" "At the airport. I'm about to grab a cab. Why?" My breath came fast and uneven. I squeezed my eyes shut. "Anna." My voice shook. "There's someone in our bed." Silence. Then a sharp inhale. "What?" "She looks like you," I whispered. "She sounds like you, but she's not you." A long, heavy pause. Then Anna's voice dropped, barely audible. "Get out of the house, now." I swallowed hard. "I don't think I can." The doorknob rattled. I froze. A soft knock followed. "Babe." Her voice was sweet, laced with concern. "Are you okay?" I backed away from the door, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Come back to bed," she coaxed. "You're acting weird." My hand shook as I reached for the window. It was locked. I fumbled with the latch, my breath coming in quick, panicked gasps. The knocking stopped. A long silence. Then, "I know you're scared." My blood ran cold. I turned slowly, my back pressed against the wall. The door was still closed, but her voice, it wasn't coming from the hallway anymore. It was coming from inside the bathroom. I spun toward the mirror, and there she was, standing behind me. Her face was wrong, too smooth, too perfect, like a porcelain doll trying to mimic human skin. Her smile was wider now, stretching too far. Her eyes, dark and bottomless, locked onto mine. I couldn't breathe. She reached forward. Her reflection moved, but I didn't. The bathroom door burst open. Anna's real voice shouted my name. The thing in the mirror twisted violently, its face warping into something hollow, something inhuman, before the glass shattered, sending shards flying. And then she was gone. Anna grabbed me, her hands ice cold. "Are you okay?" I was shaking. My pulse was erratic. My mouth opened, but no words came out. I turned back to the mirror. Cracks spiderwebbed across the glass, distorting my reflection. But I was alone. No shadow, no smile, just me. Anna led me out of the house, her grip tight, as if she thought I might disappear. We never spoke about it after that. We moved, changed numbers, got rid of every mirror in the new place. But sometimes, late at night, when I glance at a dark window or catch my reflection in a screen, I swear I see her, smiling, waiting. Story number 8. The love letter that arrived too late. The letter arrived on Valentine's morning. I found it in my mailbox, buried between bills and flyers, a small, cream-colored envelope with my name written in familiar, looping handwriting. The moment I saw it, my hands went cold. My breath hitched in my throat. It was impossible. The letter was from Daniel. Daniel, who had died exactly 1 year ago. I stood there, the wind cutting through my coat, the world suddenly too silent. Snowflakes drifted down in slow spirals, the weight of the moment pressing into my chest. My fingers trembled as I turned the envelope over. There was no return address, just my name, written in his handwriting, the same handwriting I had memorized from years of love notes, birthday cards, and silly little messages he'd leave in my notebooks. I swallowed hard. This had to be a mistake, a cruel joke, someone playing with me. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. I carried the letter inside, my footsteps echoing in the empty apartment. The heater hummed, filling the space with warmth, but I still felt frozen. For a long moment, I just stared at the envelope. My mind replayed that night a year ago. The accident, the flashing red and blue lights, the way his hand had slipped from mine in that hospital room, the heart monitor flatlining. The pain had settled into me like a second heartbeat, constant and dull. And now, here it was, a message from him. I inhaled sharply and tore the envelope open. The paper inside was yellowed, aged in a way that didn't make sense. The ink had bled slightly, as if it had been wet once. But the words, his words, were still clear. My love, I know this letter will reach you late, but I need you to hear me. I never wanted to leave you. Not like this. Not so soon. But I need you to know I'm still here. Please don't cry when you read this. Don't be afraid. I have tried to reach you so many times, but the space between us is not what it used to be. It's thin, and it's getting thinner. Tonight, on Valentine's night, I need you to do one thing. Leave the lights on, no matter what happens, no matter what you hear. Do not turn them off. I love you, always. Daniel. A lump formed in my throat. My hands gripped the paper so tightly the edges curled. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. But my entire body screamed otherwise. I read the letter again and again. I traced his handwriting, memorized the ink strokes, the way he signed his name. It was him. It had to be. The day passed in a blur. I couldn't focus, couldn't eat. The weight of the letter sat in my chest like a stone, and as night fell, I found myself doing exactly what it said. I left every light on. Every lamp, every overhead bulb, even the tiny nightlight in the hallway. The apartment glowed unnaturally, every shadow banished. And then, at exactly midnight, the knocking started. It was soft at first. 3 slow, deliberate knocks on my front door. I sat frozen on the couch, my heart hammering. Then, 3 more knocks. The letter lay open beside me, Daniel's words burning into my brain. Do not turn the lights off. I swallowed, forcing myself to stand. My legs felt unsteady as I moved toward the door. Another knock. I pressed my eye to the peephole. There was nothing there. The hallway outside was empty, bathed in the eerie glow of the flickering hallway light. No footprints in the thin layer of snow that had blown in from outside. No shadows, nothing. I backed away, pulse hammering in my ears, and then the lights flickered. A deep, sinking terror curled in my stomach. The kitchen light sputtered, then went out. Then the bathroom, then the hallway. One by one, the apartment was being swallowed by darkness. I ran to the nearest lamp, my hands shaking as I twisted the knob. Nothing. The power was gone. The last light left was the one in the living room, flickering weakly, and then I heard it, breathing, not mine, not close, but everywhere. A slow, hollow inhale, and then an exhale, heavy and wet. I turned, my back pressing against the wall. The room was dim now, the last bulb flickering erratically. My shadow stretched unnaturally across the floor, twisting at odd angles. And then, just beyond the dying light, I saw him. Daniel. But not as I remembered him. His face was pale, his eyes too dark, sunken deep into his skull. His lips moved, forming words I couldn't hear. His hands reached out, his fingers curling, beckoning. My breath caught in my throat. Daniel? My voice cracked. He stepped closer. The last bulb flickered once, twice, and went out. Darkness swallowed everything. The breathing grew louder, closer. I squeezed my eyes shut. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. And then, just when the air became unbearably thick, a whisper. You left the lights on. The sound of it sent ice down my spine. His voice, but wrong, twisted, stretched into something inhuman, and then the lights flared back on. I gasped, stumbling forward. The apartment was bright again, every bulb glowing as if nothing had happened. The air was still, silent. I turned, searching, but Daniel was gone. The only thing left was the letter on the floor, the ink darker now, like fresh blood soaking through the paper. I never slept that night. By morning, the letter was gone. The envelope, the paper, everything. But I know what I saw. What I heard? Daniel tried to reach me, or something pretending to be him. And worst of all, I know this. It's not over, because last night, just before midnight, I found another letter. This time it wasn't signed Daniel. It just said, "Turn off the lights." Story number 9. A Table for One. The restaurant was almost empty when I arrived. Snow fell heavily outside, piling up against the windows, muffling the city's usual noise. Inside, the warm glow of candlelight flickered against the dark wood walls, the scent of roasted meat and red wine filling the air. Soft piano music played from an old speaker in the corner. I pulled off my coat, shaking the cold from my shoulders as I approached the hostess stand. "Reservation for 2, I said, my voice quieter than usual. The hostess, a woman with a strange, too-still smile, scanned the book in front of her. Her eyes flicked up to me, and for a moment something unreadable crossed her face. "Ah," she murmured, "your date is already here." A chill ran through me. "What?" She gestured toward the far end of the restaurant. A small table sat by the window, candlelight reflecting off the snowy glass. A single plate of food rested on the table. A chair was pulled out facing mine. I frowned. "That's not possible. I came alone." The hostess tilted her head. "Are you sure?" My stomach tightened. I scanned the restaurant again, looking for something, anything that made sense. Only a few other diners sat scattered throughout the room, speaking in hushed tones. None of them were looking at me. I hesitated before walking toward the table, my footsteps slow, deliberate. The plate was half-eaten. A fork rested against the edge, a smear of sauce trailing across the porcelain. The napkin on the other side of the table was slightly crumpled, as if someone had just set it down. I pulled out my chair, my pulse thudding in my ears. The air felt heavier now, the warmth of the restaurant suddenly suffocating. I looked back at the hostess. She was gone. The waiter appeared almost instantly, setting a fresh glass of water in front of me. His face was blank, unreadable. "Are you ready to order?" he asked. "You ready?" I swallowed. Who was sitting here before I arrived? The waiter didn't blink. "I'm afraid I don't understand." I gestured at the half-eaten plate. "My date! You said they were already here." The waiter's lips parted slightly, as if considering his answer. Then he nodded. "Yes." I waited for him to continue, but he didn't. My fingers tightened around the napkin in my lap. "Where are they now?" The waiter's expression didn't change. "They're still here." A shiver ran through me. I turned sharply, scanning the restaurant. The other diners were still seated, their voices low and murmured, almost like a recording playing on a loop. The snow outside had thickened, the windows now a blur of white. I looked back at the table. The fork was gone. My chest tightened. I hadn't heard anything, hadn't seen anyone move, but the fork was missing. I pushed my chair back, my heartbeat drumming against my ribs. "I think there's been a mistake." The waiter just smiled. "There are no mistakes here." The candle flickered. A whisper brushed my ear. "Sit down." I froze. The voice was right beside me. Too close, too real. My entire body locked up, my breath catching in my throat. Slowly I turned my head. The chair opposite me was no longer empty. A shape sat there now, just barely visible in the dim light. Not fully formed, not solid, but there, a distortion in the air, like heat rising from pavement. It flickered, shifting like it was struggling to take shape. I couldn't move. The whisper returned, curling through my mind like smoke. "You're late." My stomach dropped. I stumbled backward, knocking over my chair. The sound echoed loudly through the restaurant, but none of the other diners reacted. My breath came in short, sharp gasps. "Who are you?" The figure across from me tilted its head, the motion jerky, unnatural. The candlelight trembled, casting long, stretching shadows across the walls. The waiter stepped forward, unfazed. "Would you like to see the dessert menu?" I turned to him, my voice barely a whisper. "What is this place?" His smile never wavered. "A place for those who wait too long." The room felt like it was closing in, the air thick with something I couldn't name. I needed to leave. Now I turned toward the door, but the entrance was gone. The spot where I had walked in was nothing but more dark wood paneling blending seamlessly into the rest of the wall. The coat rack beside it was empty, as if my coat had never been there in the first place. Panic clawed at my throat. "I need to leave." The waiter simply nodded. "Then finish your meal." I looked back at the table. The plate was full again. Steam curled from the food, as if it had just been placed there. The chair opposite me was empty. The whisper returned. "You shouldn't have come alone." I ran. I didn't know where I was going. There were no doors, no windows that led anywhere real. But I ran, weaving between tables, my breath coming fast and uneven. The other diners didn't react. They just sat murmuring their endless conversations, eyes never meeting mine. The room stretched, warped, the walls expanding and shrinking with each step. I turned a corner and I was back at the table. The waiter sighed, shaking his head. "No running." I backed away, hands shaking. "Please." The candlelight flickered violently. The shadows deepened, and then behind me, a breath, warm, close, right against my neck. I turned. A face stared back at me, my own, but it wasn't a reflection. It was me, sitting in the chair I had abandoned, staring up at myself with dark, hollow eyes. My mouth curled into a slow, knowing smile. The whisper came again, curling around my mind, seeping into my bones. "Sit down." My legs buckled. I stumbled forward, catching the edge of the table. The room spun, my vision blurring, my body sinking. The moment I sat down, the whispers stopped. The room was normal again. The waiter straightened his tie. The diners spoke in hushed tones. The snow outside fell softly against the window. I turned my head. The chair across from me was empty. The waiter placed a small folded piece of paper on the table beside me. "Your bill." My fingers trembled as I picked it up. There was no price, just a single line scrawled in ink. "You never left." The candle flickered. The shadows stretched. And then I understood. I wasn't waiting for my date anymore. I was the one being waited for. Story number 10. His face was wrong. The first time I noticed his face was wrong, we were walking through the snow. It was Valentine's night, and the town was silent beneath the heavy snowfall. The streetlights flickered dimly, casting long shadows against the frozen pavement. I held Jake's hand, my gloved fingers laced through his. His grip was warm, steady, familiar. But something was off. He had been quiet all evening, his responses slower than usual. At first I thought he was just tired, but as we walked past a shop window I caught our reflection in the glass, and my stomach twisted. Jake's face didn't match his movements. I turned to look at him directly, my breath clouding between us. His expression was normal, relaxed even, but in the reflection he was staring at me. I stopped walking. My pulse pounded against my ribs. "Jake?" He turned, his eyes meeting mine. There was nothing wrong. He looked exactly like he always had. But the moment I glanced back at the reflection, his mouth was still moving, whispering something I couldn't hear. A cold wave of nausea rolled through me. I looked at him again, my hands tightening into fists. "Are you okay?" He tilted his head slightly, like he didn't understand the question. "Of course. Why?" I forced a laugh, shaking off the unease. "You've been quiet." He smiled, but the edges of his lips curled just a little too much. We continued walking, the snow crunching beneath our boots. I tried to ignore the growing unease pressing against my chest. Maybe it was just my imagination. Maybe I was overthinking. Then we passed another window, and I saw it again. The reflection was staring at me, his lips moving rapidly, soundlessly. But the real Jake, he was just walking beside me, his face calm, unreadable. I sucked in a sharp breath. I knew my boyfriend. I knew every detail of his face, the slight scar by his eyebrow, the dimple that only showed when he truly laughed. But this man, whoever he was, his face was wrong. The proportions were slightly off. his cheekbones too sharp, his eyes too deep, too dark, as if something inside was stretching its way to the surface. I stopped walking again. This time I let go of his hand. He turned, his head tilting in that same unnatural way. Something wrong? I swallowed hard. My breath came in short, uneven gasps. I just need a second. His expression didn't change. His eyes locked onto mine, unblinking. Then, slowly, his lips moved. "You don't recognize me, do you?" My stomach twisted violently. The voice was Jake's, but the words, the way they slid from his mouth, felt practiced, unnatural. "What?" I whispered. He took a step closer. Something inside me screamed, "Run." I turned sharply, breaking into a sprint. My boots slid against the ice, my breath ragged as I pushed forward. The streetlights above flickered, casting jagged shadows across the snow. I didn't look back. I didn't want to. But I could hear him. His footsteps didn't match mine. They were wrong. Too slow, too deliberate, as if he wasn't running, just gliding forward. Then he spoke again, but this time his voice was right beside my ear. "You know what I am." A choked sob tore from my throat. I ran harder, my lungs burning, the freezing air cutting against my skin. The town was empty, the streets stretching endlessly before me. Then I saw it, an alleyway to the left. I veered sharply, slipping on the ice as I dove into the darkness. The moment I did, the world around me fell silent. The wind stopped. The distant hum of streetlights vanished. Even my own breathing sounded muffled, as if I had stepped into something else. I pressed myself against the brick wall, my chest heaving. My fingers shook as I covered my mouth, trying to stay quiet. Then, slowly, I peeked around the corner. Jake was standing at the end of the street, his body still, his face lifted slightly toward the sky. His posture was unnatural, too rigid, too stiff, like a puppet waiting for someone to pull its strings. Then his head turned toward me. Not his body. Just his head. The movement was wrong. A slow, twisting motion, his neck bending at an impossible angle. His lips curled into that same stretched smile. And then he started walking. Not running, not hurrying, just walking, like he knew exactly where I was. My vision blurred with panic. I turned, heart hammering, searching for another way out. My boots crunched against the snow as I moved deeper into the alley, my mind screaming at me to wake up, to run faster, to do something. And then I saw it. A door, slightly ajar, light spilling from the crack beneath it. I didn't hesitate. I lunged forward, shoving it open, stepping inside. And the moment I did, the air changed. Warmth wrapped around me. The scent of vanilla and cinnamon filled my lungs. The sound of laughter, soft, distant, echoed from somewhere beyond. I turned sharply, expecting the door to slam behind me. But it was gone. No alleyway, no street. Just a long, narrow hallway stretching forward, the walls lined with flickering candlelight. I stumbled backward, my breath uneven. My fingers trembled as I reached for my phone. No signal. A shadow moved at the end of the hallway. I went still, and then, "Why did you run?" The voice came from behind me. I turned slowly, my entire body locking up with dread. Jake stood there, but not Jake. His face was almost right. Almost. But now there was no mistaking it. His eyes weren't eyes. They were hollow, empty. And his mouth was still moving even though no words were coming out. He took a step forward, and I finally understood. It had never been Jake. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. I let out a strangled gasp and turned to run. But the hallway was gone. All that remained was darkness, and his voice. You should have never looked at my face. Story number 11. The Midnight Visitor. The first knock came at exactly midnight. A slow, deliberate tap. Tap, tap. I sat up instantly, my breath fogging in the cold air of the cabin. The fire had burned low, casting long, trembling shadows against the wooden walls. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, but beneath it, I swore I could hear something else. A whisper. A murmur just beyond the door. Anna stirred beside me, groggy. What was that? I swallowed hard. Someone's at the door. She frowned, rubbing sleep from her eyes. It's past midnight. Who the hell would be out here? That was the question clawing at my mind. We were miles away from town, in a secluded cabin we had rented for Valentine's weekend. No neighbors, no roads nearby except the one we drove in on, just endless snow and trees stretching into the darkness. The knock came again. Tap, tap, tap. Anna sat up straighter, her face paling. Maybe it's someone lost in the storm. I hesitated. That would have made sense, if not for one thing. The footprints, or rather, the lack of them. I had checked when I walked past the window. The fresh snow outside was untouched. No trails leading up to the cabin, no signs of movement, but someone was at the door. A slow, creeping dread curled in my gut. "Stay here," I whispered, sliding out of bed. I moved toward the front of the cabin, my socks barely making a sound on the wooden floor. My pulse pounded against my ribs as I reached the door. I hesitated, then pressed my ear against the wood. Silence. Then a whisper, so faint I almost didn't hear it. "Let me in." My skin prickled with ice. The voice wasn't desperate, it wasn't pleading, it was expectant. Like whoever was on the other side knew I was listening, knew I was hesitating. Every instinct screamed at me not to open the door. I glanced toward the window, my breath shallow. The snow was still untouched. No footprints, no sign of life. Another whisper. "I know you're awake." I backed away. Anna's voice was tight, barely above a whisper. "What do they want?" I turned to her, shaking my head. "I don't know, there's no one out there." Her face twisted in confusion. "What do you mean? We just heard them knock." I didn't answer. I couldn't. Something was very, very wrong. The knocking started again, faster this time. Tap, 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 tap. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay calm. "We're not answering." Anna grabbed my arm. "But what if it's someone who needs help?" I looked at her. "Then where are their footprints?" Her breath hitched. The knocking stopped. And then something changed. The temperature in the room plummeted. The fire behind us flickered violently, the flames shrinking down to nothing but embers. The cabin suddenly felt smaller, the walls pressing in, the air thick and unmoving. The voice returned, softer now, just a breath against the wood. "I see you." My stomach dropped. A creak sounded from the window. Not the door. The window. Hannah turned sharply, her breath caught in her throat. "No," she whispered. Slowly, unwillingly, I turned my head. A shape stood just outside the glass. Tall, unmoving. A dark silhouette against the snow, its face obscured by the reflection of the dim light inside. But the worst part, the part that made my blood run cold, was that the snow beneath it was untouched. It wasn't standing on the ground. It was floating. A sharp, stinging terror clawed its way up my spine. I grabbed Anna's wrist, pulling her back toward the bedroom. "We need to go." She resisted, her eyes locked on the window. "It's still there," she whispered. I didn't want to look again. I couldn't. But I did. And the face was at the glass. Not pressed against it, not leaning in. Just there. Close. Too close. It didn't have eyes. Just black, hollow voids where they should have been. Its mouth was slightly open, like it was whispering, but no sound came out. And then it smiled. A slow, stretching grin that didn't belong on any human face. Anna let out a choked sob, her body trembling. I grabbed the closest thing I could, a heavy lamp from the nightstand, and hurled it at the window. The glass shattered. A blast of freezing wind roared into the cabin, knocking over furniture, sending embers from the fireplace swirling through the air. The moment the window broke, the figure vanished. Just gone. The silence that followed was deafening. Anna clutched my arm. "What the hell was that?" I shook my head, my breath ragged. "I don't know." We didn't sleep. We sat in the center of the cabin, the fireplace rekindled, every light turned on. The front door stayed locked. The broken window let the cold in, but neither of us dared to move near it. And then Just before dawn, something changed. The air lifted. The heavy pressure vanished. The fire burned normally again. And outside, there were footprints, leading away from the cabin. Long, dragging prints that stretched toward the tree line before disappearing completely. We left at sunrise. Neither of us spoke about it on the drive home. Neither of us mentioned how the fire had nearly gone out when the knocking started, how the air had grown so still, how the thing outside knew us. But I still think about it. I still wonder, what would have happened if we had opened the door? If you made it this far, you're braver than most, but tell me, have you ever experienced something unexplainable? A whisper in the dark, a shadow where there shouldn't be one. Share your horror stories in the comments below. I'd love to read them. And if you enjoyed this CV healing journey, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more terrifying tales. Your support keeps the nightmares coming. Before you go, check out the videos appearing on your screen. You won't want to miss them. Stay safe and keep the lights on.